Thank you, RL.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Taylor, and I'm a licensed prayer practitioner here this morning. And want to welcome you all. And let's take a moment to go within. And if you're comfortable, to close your eyes. And feel the energy of this brand new day, welcoming spring. The buzzing of the birds, the buzzing of the chatter before service, the uplifting vibration, all this goodness within our sanctuary today and within our community. And for this and so much more, I'm so grateful. Each one of us is blessed to be here, to share in music and words and spirit and love. And I give thanks for Reverend John's message, RL and Max, their music, and the live streamers that make this possible for anyone to see this service throughout the week or throughout the year. For this and so much more, I am grateful, as together we say, and so it is. I selected a reading this morning from one of my favorite Ernest Holmes' book, which is a founder of our philosophy, and it's called This Thing Called You. And here we go. The wisest man who ever lived said there is a truth which can set us free from fear, want, unhappiness, and finally death itself. He said that this truth is already within you. Nothing could be more wonderful than this. It is what you have been looking for, but hardly dared believe. Suppose you accept this spiritual wisdom, since the one who gave it to you was able to prove his claims. Don't you think that this great and glorious person was telling you that the kingdom of your good is here right now, today? No matter what the negations of yesterday may have been, your affirmations of today may rise triumphant over them. This is the highest hope ever placed before the vision of man's search for something that can make him whole. The evil of your yesterdays can vanish into nothingness. If you can see the beauty instead of ugliness, beauty will appear. Cease weeping over the mistakes of yesterday and steadfastly beholding the face of the great and divine reality. Walk into the light where there is no darkness and say, and this is an affirmation / prayer. I know that every negative condition of the past is swept aside. I refuse to see it or think about it. Yesterday is no longer here. Tomorrow has not yet arrived. Today is God's day. God's day is my day. Today, bright with hope and filled with promise, is mine. Today my heart is without fear. I have implicit confidence in the good, the enduring, and the true. Today I shall guard my thought and speech. I shall keep my consciousness steadfast with the realization that there is a spiritual power upon which I rely. I shall turn resolutely to that divine source which knows no confusion, to that spiritual center which knows no fear. The Spirit is not afraid of anything. The divine has no enemies. The Spirit knows no opposites. Consciously, I draw close to my divine center, the source of all that is. I feel the warmth of its presence. I enter into a faith made perfect through love and confidence and complete by the abandonment of myself to all good. Acknowledging good in all my ways, desiring only the good for others, I rest in calm assurance. I open my consciousness to the realization that all the power and presence there is clothes me in its eternal embrace, that the Spirit forever imparts its life to me. I believe in myself because I believe in God. I believe in my destiny because I know that the law of good is operating through me. I have confidence in the future and enthusiastic expectations of the good things to come. Therefore, I accept the fullness of this life in this moment.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody. Look what spring brought out from underneath the snow. I thought it was so interesting this morning knowing that it was the spring equinox. It is the equinox, not the solstice. It always amazes me that it starts at a specific time. Did you know that it started exactly at 9:30 Mountain Time today? So that's what the excitement of chatter was this morning. We all kind of energetically knew that something was up and that an energy kind of shifted a little bit. And I believe in that. Just as when we go into winter and from the solstice, there's that feeling of let's just go in a little bit, order a case of hot chocolate or anything else to make it through the winter. And I don't know, I haven't been feeling a little frisky the last couple days. There's things that we can do. Again, there's a lawn out there, or at least the beginnings of a lawn out there. So anyways, here we are, it's spring. So who was here either online or in person to see Rabbi Robbie last week? Don't you just love Rabbi Robbie? I mean, she almost makes me think, well, maybe I need to be part-time Jewish or something because I just love Rabbi Robbie, and she's so amazing. And for those that weren't here or viewed it, she, of course, gave us a Passover preview. Her Passover doesn't start until the 15th, but she was available for yesterday, and she did what she called Passover Jeopardy. Basically, Jeopardy with a Hebrew twist, and of course the only category was Passover, and it was a lot of fun. But of course she admits that it just barely touching the tops of Passover. It is such a deep traditional observance, and as she and I were talking privately, said that she could come and give an all-day class every day for a week, and we still wouldn't have truly gotten to everything with it. But as she was speaking last week in the middle of playing Jeopardy and all that sort of stuff, she made a reference that somehow perked up my ears. And a reference for an observance within Jewish tradition that I hadn't really heard of or was aware of. And it's so interesting to me how, not that I'm an expert in anything, but I never even knew that existed. Do you ever come to that? I never even knew. She talked about, and I wrote about this in my blog this week, of this period referred to as narrow straits, or feeling limited of sorts. And it refers to, and I'm going to read a little bit because I can't really explain it, I think, on the cuff here, of a time, looking at a time in different times in Jewish history that were difficult, and they often seem to happen at the same time of year. It's almost like, oh, here's this month again, and oops, will something negative happen? And so it's turned into a 3-week observance of not just commemorating things that happened in the past, but it's like any spiritual observance. There's a thing that happened in the past, but it has lessons for us in the present, and as we even look towards the future. So it's not living in the past, but it's bringing the lessons from the past to the present and seeing, well, what can this teach us now? And to acknowledge not only our history, but where we are now. So let me read a couple paragraphs of something that I found, because I don't think I could do it justice. This was written by Dr. Erica Brown, who is a Jewish educator. And there's 2 paragraphs. The one is more historical, to kind of give us, like we would understand from one paragraph what this is about. But the second paragraph it brings it more into the universal. Like the first is, well, even if maybe if you're not in the Jewish culture, you can't understand it. But the second is, oh, I can see how that relates. So, and she wrote a book called 3 Weeks in the Narrow Places. And this is just a little excerpt from that. So the first paragraph. In the Jewish calendar, there is a period of time that, and first of all, excuse my pronunciations of Hebrew. It's going to be a mess. Just want you to know already, up front. In the Jewish calendar, there is a period of time that we call Bien Hametzarim, between the straits, which refers to the period of mourning commemorating the destruction of the first and second temples. The 3 weeks start with the fast of the 17th of Tammuz and ends on the 9th day of Av, the fast of Tisha B'Av. Both of these fasts commemorate events surrounding the destruction of the temples and the subsequent exile of the Jews from the land of Israel. If you look at Hebrew word for straits, you see that it contains the word tsar, which literally means narrow, but also means anguish or distress. And let's go to the second paragraph. It says, when we are in tsar, our vision is very limited. We can't see past the pain and suffering. We feel anguished and distressed. There doesn't appear to be a reason for the pain. We can't see that maybe, just maybe, there is a bigger picture. That maybe, just maybe, there is a purpose for it all. We are caught in a narrow passage, caught in the moment in which we are in. However, when we can broaden our vision, see past the pain, understand that there is a purpose, a why, then we might be in pain, but we won't be in anguish. We know that we are not alone, and that with God's help, we will all get through it. So I thought, boy, that's today, at least for me and my experience. And just all week thinking of this idea of a narrow passage. So let's, before we go back to the larger thing of just how narrow passages work in our own lives. And maybe you've not realized it, but this is how they seem to work, for not only my life, but in my observance. So we're going along in what we call normal, whatever that is. I don't know if I've experienced normal in recent history, but what we think of as normal. Usual challenges, like, oh, there's a challenge. I can call my friend whatever, and they will help me. I know how to get through this. And you're in quote-unquote normal. And then all of a sudden, we take a step into the not-so-normal in our life. And that can be any number of things. It can be negative things, like an unanticipated diagnosis that you have no idea what the treatment might be. It could be that suddenly you find your finances in really great distress. Or you may find that you and your family are just going through some really difficult things that suddenly normal is not normal. And we go into what is called a narrow strait, meaning I don't see a way out of this. I see that what I perceive as my options as few, and those options are ones that I would prefer not to take. And so almost think of it like at the airport, an international airport, and suddenly you're in the TSA line. And you're thinking, how can I work out of this line? I really should have gotten that credit card that would get me a higher thing that I could go in the special line. I mean, the things that go through my head, how can I get out of this line? Can I rush the line? Absolutely not. You're just there. Your options are few. Gee, if I only had stopped at Starbucks first. Or I wish I didn't stop at Starbucks because now I have to go to the restroom. But you can't do anything. You're right there. So that's what the narrow straits are. And we go in different areas of our life like that until we pop out into what we think of maybe a new normal, where suddenly we feel expansive again. But that growth in consciousness and in physical conditions often we are in a narrow straits where the world doesn't seem to make sense at the moment. And of course, we have experienced that with COVID. Like just when we think we're out of the woods, like I'm almost out of the TSA line and like, they put in another line. Shocking, whatever. Or I forgot my passport or some weird thing like that. And then of course now we're experiencing Ukraine, which on one hand it seems so far away, but yet I think we all know that it's going to have long-lasting global results in our day-to-day life. And I don't think we've fully comprehended that yet. And we have no idea what that is. And that's the frustrating thing about narrow straits. It's like we're in this worldwide event, and suddenly we're like, whew, it's not so expansive as I thought. We have no idea where it's going. No idea what our options are, but yet we're like here in this TSA line just at times feeling helpless, especially in worldwide things. We think, well, what can I do? But I think the other thing about narrow straits is that it has this feeling of stopping us almost in our tracks, and we're never stopping really, but a feeling of stopping and looking, and maybe looking at things we don't really want to look at, because you seemingly feel like we've stopped or slowed down, and you can't just like go 90 miles an hour and say, well, there it was. It's right there. And I think, for me personally, a great example of this metaphorically was about a month ago. So I was early evening driving from Ketchum to Haley. We've all done that how many times? And if you're not at home, I'll try to give you the geographical things of this if you haven't done that. So as you know, it's 10 miles. Most times it's a zip down the highway, isn't it? 15 minutes maybe. 10 minutes the way I drive. But it's a reasonably, easy. And so as I am going through East Fork Greenhorn, as you know, you're a little bit higher and you can see about 3 or 4 miles ahead. And there's always that moment going there that you see more red lights on the rear, and you think, oh, I didn't, time this well, because I'm seeing it starting to slow down. And of course, immediately it's all about you, isn't it? It's like, but I have to pick up a pizza on the way home. What will happen? Will it be an old pizza by the time I get there? And so, as I'm going into there, and it's getting a little bit slower, and then suddenly I'm seeing lights of emergency vehicles. So I know that there's something much more serious going on. And there was an accident, a couple cars. And as I arrived at my place in line at the crash site, a policeman stepped in front of my car and stopped me. Now, everyone in front of me was allowed to go through, and I was the stopping point because there was a big old mess here. And of course, initially it is, again, all about me. Why didn't I get let through? I don't want to sit here. Look, they're already in Haley, and here I am. But after a split second of playing oh poor me, I could see what was right in front of me. Two cars that looked like a giant had kind of taken and went and there were EMTs helping people who were injured first in the car, and of course I'm assuming assessing how they can safely take them out of the car, get them into the ambulance, and bring them up north. And of course that's all taking a period of time, but it's a narrow straight one. I am physically constricted. I can't help but see something that I don't want to see. I mean, I am the first car right there, right up front. People who are severely injured are within 20 feet of my viewpoint, so you can't miss it. And I'm seeing every aspect of the way, and it's interesting when you're way back in line, it can be more personal and just inconvenient and what's going on, but it's right there. Absolutely right there, and seeing every step in the way. Then finally they were able to safely get the people on stretchers and into the ambulance. And then of course the next part is for the police people to try to get the road safe before they can let us go. I mean, again, it's just like car parts all over the place, and getting it that they can at least temporarily get things towed to the side so that they can now let us go through, which again they finally did. But I think that is such a good example of the narrow straight. You feel stuck. You're seeing things that you would prefer not to see. And you start to realize how tenuous life can be. But the other thing that I think is common in that experience is to think, well, what can I do? Especially in that situation. The worst thing I could do is get out of the car and say, hey, can I help? I mean, the most help I can do is to stay in my car and follow directions, really. But the thing that you can do, which sounds like not much at first, is start to realize, and now in this larger world where we feel maybe helpless or disconnected, is that we are connected. That the one thing that you can do, that it may sound more like spiritually gobbledygook, is to recognize that the power and presence of good and the divine is actually at all places, at all times. And that healing is actually possible, even when it looks like it is not. And that's all you can do sometimes in those moments. That's all sometimes that we can do now as we look at this situation in Ukraine unfold before our eyes and feeling like, well, what can I do? And it's not a very satisfying thing to do all the time. Because I think we want a little bit more immediacy. We want to be able to do something that feels like we're in the action, or somehow I can concretely say, I did this to make a difference so this would happen. And when we're in those moments, which I think are more often than not, all we can do is be in that presence of there is something greater available right now. That, as Dr. Brown had said, see that there is a bigger picture. Now, when we look at bigger picture, though, when I read this, sometimes I can go back to my grade school teachings in religion, that there's a God with a plan. There's a parental man up there that, we're chess pieces, and you've got your part, and you may not have liked the role you were chosen to give, but there's a plan. God has a plan for you. And I don't think of it in that way, myself personally. But there is an overarching thing that we all participate here on earth. There is a group consciousness that we have agreed to and we have created, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. And that there is a role for each of us to play in this. What is that? Oh, okay. And I just want to make sure that something wasn't exploding in the other room. Suspiciously sounded like Mission Impossible, didn't it? So, I thought, Will the Wonder Dog's what did he get into now? So in a sense, we are all connected, and we can acknowledge that there is something greater here. But we're not being punished. It's not like this evil type of karma, like, well, you did something 1,000 years ago, so just suck it up and experience sort of thing. We were all brought to this moment to be present and to know something else is available, even if you can't see that, and even if you physically isn't your turn to step up to do something. That I have found out that wanting to make a difference, makes a difference. The fact that we are seeing things now that we would prefer not to have to see, we see it anyway. And so the question is, what consciousness are we going to bring to that? And to know that there is something that we can do, and it begins in consciousness. In the readings that I've done this week, and again, these narrow places, what's the first thing you want to do in a narrow place? As I said, you want to get out of it, right? Like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too uncomfortable. I don't want to do it. I want things how they used to be, or maybe even better than they used to be, but I sure don't want to be in this place. But in some of the reading, it said that when you are in a narrow place, here's where it doesn't make sense. The trick is not struggling to get out. The way out is to commit to go further in. And at first I didn't really like that option. No, I mean, really, I'm supposed to be like, reverend, spiritual, whatever, something. Yes, just go. It's like, at first it's like, I don't want to do that. Really. No, I guess, no, that really doesn't sound like a good option. But I have found that to be true in my own narrow spots. It's like, after throwing any number of fits of how do I get out of here, and haven't you sometimes almost thought you were making a clean escape? They'll never know. Or they won't react badly to that. I'll just go now. And it's just like, there you go. You get sucked right back into the mess of your own making often. And the thing is, as uncomfortable as it is, you have to, instead of trying to back out, you have to go further in. Because I think it's a one-way street, and the way through this narrow space is not going backwards, it is just going through. and to see everything along the way that you don't want to see, quite frankly, and experiencing that you would prefer not to experience, but to do it anyway. And what we are in now, I believe, in the world as well as as individuals, is to reevaluate where we are, where we want to be, and our belief of what we think is possible for us. Because I think in the moment of the narrow straits, if there were like chapters, I think we're in the chapter of, maybe there's sub-chapters. Couldn't get any worse. Better buy a bunker. I always thought buying a year's worth of food at Costco was a silly idea. Now, not so much. And so, I mean, it's easy to go into those weird spots in our brain, but to realize, in spite of the way that it looks, and maybe at the narrowest part of this narrow strait, that's how I've been feeling the last couple days, that as we go further in, we begin to see not just the way out, but the way through. And as we recognize this presence of the divine, that it starts again with us. Of course, when we think of God as being the guy in the cloud with a beard, we think, well, there can't be a God. Why would he allow this to happen? Kind of like we made our own mess. There's no referee. So we think, well, why doesn't the divine show up through this thing or person up here? Actually, the divine shows up through 8 billion emissaries. It's our job to open up and to allow it to come through. As you know, I started to read a book that Sarah Gorham is doing a book discussion starting this week called I Am the Word. And it is interesting. It is, I think it's science of mind philosophy served up in the 21st century, basically. But it talks about how the presence of the divine is within each of us, but we have to acknowledge it even if we don't see it. We have to, in a sense, give it permission to come forth and not be dormant, which dormant mean because we've got into our own stuff that is, well, you're busy with that. Let me just go over here for a while. And for us to say, I don't want it to be dormant anymore. I don't want to be asleep anymore. So it is acknowledging that that is there, giving it to permission to come forth and see where you will lead. And as we do so, we do things like we start to see that our intentions just aren't about me and my life, that they're connected to everything else. That we do have a calling and a purpose that is so far beyond just picking a career. That it's a day-to-day purpose and a day-to-day calling that most days I get up, I haven't even a clue what I'm supposed to be doing anymore. But you keep addressing and acknowledging that power and presence within you, and that the connection of all that we are being actually forced to look through in this narrow strait. And I think, just a closing story, one of the best ways that I saw this week of acknowledging or seeing the divine in all things and knowing that's a good thing was by a short video I saw on TikTok. Does anyone watch TikTok? I'm obsessed with it. You got to. Because you don't have enough things to have in your time. I mean, it is so easy. I mean, it's terrible, actually, because you can just like, oh, my God. There's all these little mini videos from 15 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. So this one video, and some of them are ridiculous, some are terrible, and some are actually inspiring. So this young man who was a Marine gave about a 2-minute little video. And he said, this is my experience as a Marine and why I am a Marine. He says, first of all, it was so interesting when you go first day, Marine 101, basically. So you're all lined up, and we all kind of look like in here. We all dress differently. We have different hairstyles with this. It's very apparent. Our differences are very apparent here. He says, well, the first thing that they do is to erase those outer appearances of differences. So you all get buzzed, And if you're female, you don't get buzz, but you have very, strict things of what you can do with your hair. No more like hot curls and makeup and all that sort of thing. You're not like the glamour wearing it anymore. So and then you have a uniform. And so it's almost you go in looking like all of us, very different, and you come out the other side of the door looking very much the same. And you line up, and he says, at first you can't physically, visually tell the difference from one from another. But he said, we're still different on the inside. We're still very different on the inside. We're still people that have completely opposite political views about everything. There's people that he said that, in a sense, not only did he disagree with, but found very annoying and would prefer were not in his troop. Kind of like your family. Yeah, just think about your family. Oh, yeah. That's why I moved, But he said the reason why he's a Marine, because he's really clear that his job is to fight for the person that most annoys him. To give permission for that person to have a different political view. To realize that we are a larger table here where there's a seat for everyone. And in his mind, that's what being in the service for our country is about, is to allow all of it to exist at the same time. And I have a feeling that same lesson just might coincidentally be at the root of everything that's happening in the world today. Let me just think of that. So it's showing up at things like COVID and wars in Ukraine and fighting with your neighbors and about politics. But it gets down to that one lesson that the divine in me can recognize the divine in all things, even when they annoy the heck out of me. That's the difficult thing in the narrow straight. I'm caught in the TSA line with someone who completely has a different vision of the world than I do. And I'm stuck. And I think I won't get out of this line until I can fully embrace them on some level. So, here we are. So let's just go within. So in great gratitude, let us recognize the power and presence of the divine right here where we are. It is right within us, and we absolutely give it permission to show its presence within our life and our presence. Without any limitations, without any of our human opinions put on top of it, we just allow it to be recognized and tell it to do its stuff. And in this, we not only believe, but we know that that power and presence makes healing and wholeness available in all situations. We may feel constricted right now, but we see the power and presence of the divine more closely. We see the presence of the divine in all things, in all people. We see it in all circumstances. And we say to that presence of the divine within us, sign me up. Show me the way. What's my part? I'm here to serve. Without the slightest idea what that means. But we do it anyway. And so in this, we just simply express our gratitude for this possibility, for this gratitude of being able to serve, even if we don't know what that is or what that means. We just sit in gratitude. And with that gratitude, we do something that is very powerful. We release it and we let it go. We release our attachment to it, or what it has to look like, or how it has to show back into our lives. And as we do that, we just step aside and allow miracles to happen. And in great gratitude we say, and so it is.